Good morning, everyone. We are live. Congratulations. You made it through the week. Another week of fantastic food safety, high quality products, amazing food out there in the marketplace for all of us to enjoy. And if nobody out there tells you thank you, Clint and I are going to say it here today. Thank you very much for what you do. We appreciate all you do to make sure that our food and our facilities are safe. Thank you very much. So if you're new, this is the Food Safety Chat, and my name is Bryan Armentrout with the Food Leadership Group. Pull up a chair. We're going to talk for an hour around topics of food safety, biosecurity, food defense, all these type of things, everything that you need to do to be successful in quality assurance and food safety in your manufacturing facility. And every week, I bring on a new expert who talks about a subject. And what you'll notice here, this is a talk. This is not a presentation. This is meant to be an exchange. And one of the absolutely energizing things that comes out of these food safety chats is the back and forth, the amazing comments that we get as we're going through this conversation. So this is a golden opportunity to ask Clint questions around food defense, and we'll give plenty of opportunities for that during the call. And one of the things, everyone, that we love to do here on the chat is put in where you're at in the world. I am in a currently snowing Loveland, Colorado. It's coming down pretty good out there. And we'll see how that progresses today. My guest on the show today is Clint Fairow with the Global Food Defense Institute. Sorry, I always mess that up. Good morning, Clint. How you doing today?
I'm great here in central Illinois.
How's your weather out there?
Wet right now, but it has been so mild this winter that we really don't get to complain.
Yeah, we have a few guests who come on the chat up in Minnesota, and they say, yeah, this winter has been exceptionally mild. So it's always nice when that happens, for sure. And so let's see here. Good morning, Megan. Nice to see you here. So one of the things that we do here on the chat before we get started, everybody, is grab a cup of your favorite beverage and join Clint and I for a drink. Cheers. Amazing. So, man, we have a ton to cover here. So let's dive right in here, Clint. So one of the things that we do here on the chat, if you're regular on the chat, is we have a prep call on the Monday or Tuesday following to decide on a topic. And these calls generally take, 15 minutes, a half hour tops with the guest to kind of go over what we want to do. And Clint, we went way over that. And we almost did an entire chat just talking on Monday because there's just so much stuff,
Some people have mentioned I do tend to chatter. If I can get over my nervousness from being on a podcast, I will chatter here as well.
Oh, that's part of my job is to get you in that mode. So I'm sure we'll get there. So let's give everybody a little bit of background. So you have recently joined our good friend Rod Wheeler over at the Global Food Defense Institute on his team, and he is super excited that you're on there. Why don't you give everybody a little bit of your background and what it is that you do?
Well, I became interested in science as a young child and pursued that all the way through college, studying biology, chemistry, toxicology, and public health. I have some extensive degrees in all of those except the toxicology, but I don't regret the 4 years I spent attempting that PhD because it was still very good training, very good information, which really began to pay off when I became involved in the ADM food defense effort, because they had just received the beta version of a science-based probabilistic risk assessment model for determining where within their processes they might have actual risk from an unintentional adulteration. So I got to pull on everything from physics through the toxicology, and the public health degree I worked on while I was the Global Food Defense Manager, because we had gotten the program to a point where I was bored with it and I needed a chance to fail. So I went ahead and signed up for additional coursework and earned that master's.
Nice. Jason's Jason's teasing you a little bit here in the comments, saying he really likes your piano. Yeah, I'm amazed how many this must be a huge house, because so many of my guests live in this house. I just maybe it's a common floor plan. I don't know.
Well, don't be shy, or go ahead and tell them what we are. Is we're actually in that room adjacent to where you are in your home. So we all come out to your place and hang out in your grand room.
There you go. So, gosh, I mean, it seems like, and this is something in this area that has caused tons of confusion over the years, Clint, is this whole, food safety versus food defense and intentional adulteration, all these type of things we're going to get into. And I remember kind of the first round when this happened with food defense, and everybody was freaking out, right? The anthrax powder and all these type of things, and people were super worried and just going absolutely crazy. And in one of my plants, we had boxes of labels. And these would just put stickers on the outside of the cheese. And these labels had been in this plant for 5 years at least. These old dusty boxes of labels that they would card out for these particular products. And at the time, the manufacturers of these rolls of label were using like a baby powder or something like that to help kind of lubricate the labels. And so there would be some white powder in these boxes. And so some people on the line opened up the boxes to put these labels on the machine, and there was this white powder in the box, and they freaked. They're like, "Oh my God, white powder!" And the whole plant went into lockdown, and everybody's like, "Oh my God, oh my God!" And we're investigating, we're having conference calls, and I'm like, "Okay, well, did you guys just get this box?" No, it's been here for quite a while. Well, how long? Oh, like 5 years. Like, okay, great. And then somebody on the call said, "Well, maybe we should send you a sample for you to take a look at." And I'm like, "Yeah, that's it." And I'm like, "No, don't send a white powder through the mail to me. Please don't do that." And then they're like, "Oh yeah." So it was
Where
absolute chaos.
Where I was working at the time, we received a suspicious envelope, and everybody was a little freaked out about it. So, of course, being the maybe not deep thinker that I was, I went ahead and took it to the lab, opened it up in the fume hood. It was absolutely nothing, but it is interesting how sensitive people can become to things like that and how quickly they become sensitive.
Right. And yeah, even recently, just from a psychological standpoint, COVID and everything that was done with that, right? The different reactions people had. And you see how people are still kind of trying to manage what they perceive as a risk in those areas now. Definitely psychology plays a part in this for sure.
Absolutely.
So
I'll answer your question about the difference between food safety and food defense.
Yeah, please.
Food safety efforts follow or make sure that well-established protocols are in place. So over the years, we've decided and we found that certain temperatures must be met in the processing of some foods so that they are safe to eat, safe from naturally occurring contaminants or microbial agents that might be present in the raw ingredient. With food defense, we aren't chasing a predefined set of concerns. What we're doing is we're looking at kind of an amorphous warfare situation where the threat agent can be any one of a large number of toxic industrial chemicals or pathogenic microbes. Natural toxins are my favorites. But so we have a much larger set of concerns, and the intent of the individual who might be involved in a food defense event is radically different than somebody who might come to work tired and fail to make sure that a critical control point temperature setting is set correctly.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. I mean, so part of this, right, is, and our objective for today is if you're a food safety quality manager in a production facility and you're looking at your plans and you're kind of confused by what you need to do, hopefully this will kind of point you in the right direction. And definitely, as we talk about here on the chat as well, we're more than happy to help, right? So Clint's email is right there. So feel free to reach out to him and ask questions after this, because I know in a lot of times, Clint, when you go over a very dense subject like this in a short period of time, you always have questions after the fact. So we're more than happy to help out on those.
Absolutely. I've told people in the past that the conversations that we have, off the record, over the phone, people calling up to talk about food defense and their concerns, are some of the best days at work I've ever had.
Yeah. Well, and I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, I routinely stay in touch with food defense managers at various companies and some contacts we have at DHS. So it's the icing on the cake, in my opinion.
Well, and one of the things with this too, right, is number one, and this is something, Clint, that I think a lot of food safety and technical professionals think, is that they have to know everything, right? Everything has to be contained in their brain. They have to have the answers for everything. And what I've found as I've gone through my career is it's a much more efficient and much more pragmatic approach to things is to instead find the people who know a lot more about you than this, have a basic working understanding so you can have a conversation with them, and then utilize their expertise to help you get to that next level. Because, I can't even begin to train to the level of knowledge and expertise you have. It takes too long. So it's much better to know the people who know than it is to try and figure it all yourself.
If I didn't think they're on the call and would have an inflated ego due to it, I would say that my successes have derived largely from the very intelligent people I've connected with.
Absolutely. So build those connections for sure. So as we start off on the chats a lot of times, Clint, it's always kind of going back to the regulatory standard and what it is that agencies are looking for. And it all comes down to under the Food and Drug Cosmetic Act, the Code of Federal Regulations, is FDA is always looking at two main categories: adulteration and misbranding. And really, in this type of situation, we're talking about adulteration of the product. That's kind of the end goal here. So with the adulteration of a product, kind of my first question for you then is who is going to adulterate a product in a plant, right? That's kind of where you need to start thinking about this.
That is, I made a note here. That's the $1 million question. If I could answer that question specifically, then my services would be in great demand, because if I can tell you who's going to do it, it's like a Minority Report with the precogs. We could stop it before it ever started. But you've got your FDA recognized this, that there are external aggressors and internal aggressors. The external aggressor, my old boss, Rich Ryan, used to refer to as the ninjas, the guys that are going to parachute onto the factory roof in the middle of the night, sneak in unnoticed, and add toxic agents to your product. Highly unlikely. Chances of that happening are minuscule. The bigger concern for all of us is the internal aggressor, because that's the individual that we have granted full access to the product, and we have given them our full trust. Often, I used to work in a oil refining company, and I would sit on top of the hopper at 3 o'clock in the morning, alone, unsupervised. So I think back to that all the time about who or what somebody could have done to that product if they had so desired. And then many people aren't familiar with it, but several years back, there was a terrorism arrest in the UK. It's called the Derby Terror Plot. There was an undocumented immigrant in the UK who had gotten some falsified documents. So he was actually hired by a food company. His job was to manage the mixer that made the gravy for the ready-to-eat food products.
Oh.
He and his pharmacist girlfriend had discussed agents like ricin. So they were well aware of his ability to poison food that would be consumed by, directly out of the grocery store. But they opted for the explosive devices, and that's what clued the authorities in on them. So they were arrested for having, terrorism materials and terrorism devices, but they never got to live out their fantasy of poisoning the food. Jeez. No guarantee they were intending to do that, but that is just an unbelievably good example of what can happen if you have someone in your facility that you shouldn't be trusting. I mean, we have other examples where trusted individuals turned on you and have done things in facilities and at naval yards and things like that that are just incomprehensible for the vast majority of us. But for whatever reason, these individuals become radicalized, and they decide that it is their place in the world to cause harm to as many people as possible. So we're going to talk about this a little bit later, I think, but if I don't get back to it, my belief from 10 plus years of doing food defense vulnerability assessments and risk assessments is that personnel surety is one of the most important factors that we could implement in the food and ag sector to protect ourselves against this type of an incident. We have very strict personnel surety at military installations, nuclear power plants, and other places. And we claim that the food and ag sector is a critical infrastructure and it needs to be protected from the intentional adulteration. But we seem hesitant to take that last step to truly securing it.
Wow. So that's a term that I don't normally hear floating around on the food safety side of things. What does personal surety mean then? What's surety?
Well, personal surety means that you trust me, but yet you observe my behaviors, you observe my attitudes, and if you notice a change, say, you've known me for 10 years and I've always been happy-go-lucky, jovial, but, due to family circumstances, life circumstances, financial circumstances, I've suddenly become withdrawn and sullen, and I'm no longer the nice guy you used to know.
Mhm.
At that point, you have to start thinking, is there something in his psyche now that would make him more likely to want to destroy the product or kill customers? So the in the back of my mind, the truly most dangerous individual is the person who comes to work for your company and is a standout employee, super nice guy, but from day one, the individual had the intent of eventually creating a food defense event using your product. It
Wow.
would be a covert operative who
Mhm.
entered your facility legitimately, but has always had the intent of causing harm.
Wow. Yeah. So
Now,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, it makes sense to launch a little bit further into this, but there are things called behavioral indicators. FBI has personnel surety programs that are incredibly complex, and as far as I'm concerned, almost impossible to read through. Military has similar situations, although they don't do, from what I've read, they don't do the reviews frequently enough or take them seriously enough. But there are also other organizations, and I can't remember the website right now, where they present a much more simplified approach, where they look at things like excessive alcohol consumption, drug use. Do they violate other laws? Because even within your food safety groups, if you have an individual who drives 90 in a 30-mile-an-hour zone, he doesn't really care about the rules outside of your facility, but yet we believe he does care about them inside the facility. So personal characteristics that indicate that you can or cannot trust somebody. I mean, the way I explain this is there are people we will loan our cars to. There
Mhm.
are people we will not loan our cars to. We humans have this innate sixth sense, I want to call it, of when we meet somebody, we go, he gives me a bad vibe.
Yeah.
And it's that type of sense that we have that protects us out on the street. We walk into a 7-Eleven at 11 o'clock at night. We very quickly assess the situation as to whether or not we should go ahead and do business there or whether we should get in the car and go home. So
Yeah.
all I'm saying is we need to apply the same type of assessment to the individuals that we have mixing the food that we then sell to consumers.
Wow. Yeah. So that kind of triggered two thoughts in my mind then is I remember one time my wife and I were on vacation and we were in a fast food restaurant, sitting there eating our lunch. And I watched two guys walk in the restaurant together and they had large duffel bags with them full of something. They got in, they walked in the front door, they looked around a lot, and then proceeded to sit by themselves on opposite sides of the restaurant. I immediately turned to my wife and said, let's leave. Right? Situational awareness, right? Something wasn't right with that setup, right? That's not normal behavior.
And most companies have programs where you can report concerns about workplace violence. They have programs where you can report concerns about people stealing copper wire from the facility or stealing whatever from the facility. But do we have a program where you can indicate to management that you have concerns about a particular person's suitability for their role?
Right. So there's really kind of two phases to this. And the other picture that I had in my mind relative to this is, so before you hire somebody, think about those TV shows where they have the FBI and there's somebody who wants to join the FBI and the agents come out and they talk to the parents and the brothers and they get an entire picture of that person by interviewing all these different people before they even decide if they're going to consider this person for an application. Right? They're trying to understand those type of factors that may be a risk for that person.
Yeah, and that's great because up until that point, they had presented themselves as trustworthy to those individuals being interviewed. But
Yeah.
what happens a year from then? I
Right.
mean, so my point is you need almost an ongoing program. And I'm not talking about a deep psychological profile, but we've all worked with people that gave us the willies,
Mhm.
and we worked with people that we knew we would have our backs. So the ongoing informal assessment of people's suitability for their role is important in my mind, and we've failed to implement that.
Right. That's a really good point. And the way you manage that is on the floor, right? If I'm working day in and day out with you, Clint, I'm going to get to know you very well. And to your point earlier, when you were talking about these sudden shifts in personality, you're going to pick up on that right away. Right? It's not going to be the plant manager who maybe interacts with this person weekly or sees them on the floor. It's going to be my direct coworkers of, hey, Clint, what's up? You seem a little down today, right? That type of interaction.
Yep.
I'll see. So Jason put some more information here in the comments. Thank you. So here's some more information available on personal surety. I have a hard time saying that word. So thank you very much for putting it in the comments. I also have in here later on, there's a guidance document we'll talk about a little bit as well. Something I didn't put in the notes, Clint, but definitely causes me tons of heartburn is we're talking here about personnel in a production facility that you're hiring and vetting and hopefully doing what you're talking about here. What about temporary employees? Oh my goodness.
I'm not in management at any food manufacturing facility, but I don't think I would find it difficult to allow temps to operate without being closely supervised.
Yeah. Yeah, we always, if we needed to hire temps in past companies that I've worked in, we always made sure, yeah, to your point, number one, they were always directly supervised at all times, and that they were only involved in processes with sealed finished product. So they were stacking cases of product at the end of the line onto a pallet or things like this, right? They were never allowed access to mixing areas or things where there was open access to product. So very interesting. So we talked a little bit. So we were talking about the difference between food safety and food defense, which I think we need to make really clear that those things are different. One of the things I found very fascinating with our prep call earlier this week was when you were talking about the LEO mindset. So can you elaborate on that, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Keep in mind that when the proposed regulation was being drafted, they were very clear about the fact that it was to prevent the terroristic intentional adulteration of food. You adulterate the food as an act of terrorism. We have kind of diluted that focus over the years, but that still is prominent in the back of my mind that this is actually a counterterrorism effort. So the fact that ADM had put their food defense program within their global security group, where you had ex-law enforcement, military types, made absolute perfect sense, because those were the people that had the suspicious nature necessary to think about that internal aggressor who presents themselves as trustworthy, but at the same time might have ulterior motives. So that was an excellent placement for the program.
Huh. And I mean, so that's definitely, I think in food manufacturing operations, that's a big gap, because those are not normally, if you're in a smaller company, not like Archer Daniels Midland or something like this. If you're in a smaller size company, you're not going to have on staff a resident expert who is ex law enforcement in security, right? You may bring in a consultant or things like this, but that's not a standard role, right? You have HR people and things like this, but that's not normally seen.
If you are a small company and you don't have that type of a resource internally, your FBI weapons of mass destruction coordinator, if you can get them to return your call, that would be an excellent conversation to have with them. They're very busy, apparently. You talked about background investigations earlier. I had one for a clearance upgrade. It took a full year for them to get around to finishing it, and that was one of the most fun interviews I've ever had. It was a very good time. Yeah, I'm squeaky clean. I've got nothing to hide. And they, at one point, okay, my name is, just an aside here, a little tangent. My name is Herbert Clinton Fairow. And the FBI agent looked at me from across the table and asked, "Have you ever gone by a different name?" And I said, "No." And they leaned in a little closer and they said, "Have you ever gone by a different name?" I said, "No." And they go, you go by Clint. And I said, yes, I do. And she goes, that's a different name. At which point I laughed and I said, you got me. And so again, the focus was way more in depth than I had anticipated.
That is. So what's your thought around, because a lot of times in food production facilities, when these conversations come up around food defense and, oh, well, let's give this to the quality guy. Is that the right person to be managing these programs in the facility, or does it depend?
Not necessarily. You are going to want someone who's trained in investigations. That's almost essential to do it correctly. The global food, whatever, we offer the GFDI, Global Food Defense Institute. I always mess it up myself. So the Global Food Defense Institute does offer training in investigations as well. But to turn an investigation of a potential food defense event over to someone who doesn't have that background would make me very concerned as to whether or not we were going to get to the root of the matter. And even when it comes to investigating the individuals that you suspect may be thinking about it or may be capable of an adulteration of this nature, you're going to want to get some professional help. And again, we have had instances in the past where FBI has been very, very helpful.
And so in those type of situations, you're talking, is this more of a day-to-day type interaction? Or are you talking about, okay, we've had an incident, we need to perform an investigation, let's bring some people in?
If you have a true food defense incident, the investigation is going to be handled by probably local law enforcement, FBI, maybe the FDA's investigation team. But if you have an individual that you suspect may have decided that he's the right guy to commit this type of an offense, that is going to be more of an internal investigation that you're going to want to probably keep quite private. So that's where I think having a trained individual on the inside is your best route.
And I would imagine too, there's also concerns, because I can hear this as well, is from HR. It's like, oh, well, we have to be careful doing these investigations. We can't trample all over this person's rights or what have you. How do those type of things come up?
Well, back in the day, I used to have a Post-it note stuck to my wall that read third rail, because I always figured that when HR and legal found out that we were thinking about trying to get into the minds of our employees, I would get fried. Because you absolutely have to have HR and legal on board if you're going to do this type of work. And that's probably why we've not seen it implemented in the food industry, because they are very, I'll say, risk adverse. And it's probably more the social media backlash than the actual legality of the investigation that scares them the most. So these things do have to be handled very, very discreetly and very well if you're going to succeed and not wind up with egg on your face. But I think it's absolutely essential that we at least address it and have a program in place so that when it becomes a concern, you can follow the steps that are predefined and agreed to by HR and legal. I mean, if we have workplace violence threats, there's a policy in place, there's a program in place, it's dealt with. So I think if we have concerns about somebody being interested in adulterating the food, we need the same type of a program. And in fact, it is possible to piggyback off of your workplace violence program, because some of the behavioral indicators for workplace violence also play into an individual who might be willing to commit an intentional adulteration.
That's a good point. So let me try and reflect this back to you then. So if I'm responsible in the plant, I'm the quality manager, I manage the food safety programs and these type of things. And now I'm also surprised, given responsibility for the food defense systems and all these type of activities. So number one is, right, you need to educate yourself, you need to get training and things like this. And you need to, and this is true with anything in a facility, is you need to reach out to the team. And so HR and legal need to be critical in those things. And I think one of the main, defenses that we have in implementing these type of programs is the ubiquity of it. So something that is completely standardized within the company. So you're not targeting individuals. It's just, this is part of the process. And to your point, super important. This is kind of like document retention programs and things of this nature. You have to have a written procedure and systems that you follow. And you also have to be able to demonstrate that you actually follow those procedures. Because I've seen companies that get in problems because they will have a document retention and destruction program in place. Something happens at the facility, the documents are subpoenaed, and they start shredding stuff because it's over the period of time for the retention period. No, you can't do that. You have to actually follow the procedure. Now, if you have a retention program that says, all right, after 2 years, we destroy all of our documents, and you do that, that's defendable. And I'm kind of seeing the parallels with what you're saying here as well.
Well, as someone who has been assigned the new duties for food defense in a facility, I'll throw this out there. There are two risks associated with food defense. The first risk, which is going to be your primary concern, is compliance risk. You're going to want to make sure that you have, complied with the FDA's expectations. You're going to have to make sure that you've complied with third-party organization expectations. So when you get audited by them, you aren't found to be deficient. And then there's the actual enterprise risk from an intentional adulteration. And again, I consider those to be two completely separate silos, because the compliance risk can be dealt with fairly easily. The enterprise level risk is where you're going to need to start thinking about the personnel surety programs and how you do investigations on employees who are suspect. So it's a much deeper dive, and it's an even deeper dive than workplace violence programs, because workplace violence tends to be very obvious when you have threatening behaviors or bad attitudes. I think of the covert individual who's working in the facility who has the ultimate goal of committing the adulteration. So that's going to be much harder to discern. That's why you have to have that second silo where you're trying to prevent the loss from enterprise risk.
Gotcha. So you've used the word risk there in that description a couple of times, and risk on the food safety side of things has a very definite meaning, and reasonably likely to occur, known and reasonably foreseeable hazard, these type of things. Is your usage of the word risk on the food defense side of things the same application, or is it different?
The intentional adulteration rule was written around vulnerabilities. Vulnerability is a single component of risk. With risk, we're looking at the threat, the vulnerability, and the consequences. So when I talk about risk, I mean real risk. When I talk about vulnerability, I'm talking about the single component. Gotcha. So when I'm talking about enterprise level risk, you're not just looking at the threat or the vulnerability, you're also looking at what it's going to do to your stock price, what it's going to do to your company's value, what it's going to do to your customer base. The consequences are extremely important to bring into that equation for risk. You and I and everybody on this call, we do informal risk assessments all day long. Do I step out in front of this truck? Maybe, maybe not. What's the consequence if I'm wrong? I'm dead. So I'm going to wait until the truck is gone. So the consequence weighs very heavily in the equation.
So it kind of sounds like on a hazard analysis, the risk and severity portions of those calculations. Does that parallel that?
I can see the parallel. Yep.
Okay.
The severity is of great importance. The severity would be your consequence. Does it just knock out one of my production lines, or does it shut down the entire facility? The entire facility is a much greater concern than one production line. So I would react differently to the different scenarios.
Gotcha. So back to my new employee, right? I'm in charge of quality at a facility, and I've been given responsibility for this. What type of tools, Clint, can I use to help me start putting programs in place?
Well, I had written some stuff down here. Let me pull out my notes, because like I was explaining to you before we started the podcast, I have quite a bit of information, but unfortunately it's in my head like it's poured into a 5-gallon bucket. So occasionally pulling it out requires a little effort. But the FDA guidance document, if you take the time to read that, it provides a great deal of information on how you can comply with the regulation. It talks about the key activity type assessment, where you assess each of your process steps against one of 4 or against 4 defined key activity types.
Huh?
And from there, you have to decide whether or not it meets the definition of an actual process step. And to do that, you can use the 3 elements that they also prescribe here. So again, the guidance document is extremely important, or being connected to someone who is very familiar with the guidance document will help you out a great deal with your vulnerability assessments. It also talks about the representative contaminant approach, which is incredibly valuable in determining whether or not a key activity type is actually an actual process step, because they defined a contaminant that requires 40 milligrams per. It requires 40 milligrams per serving. But if you start looking at processes that make 100,000 servings, you very quickly end up with quite a bit of representative contaminant being required. And then as a subject matter expert on the facility and on the process line, you can absolutely look at that and say 4 kilograms, that's a lot of material. There's nobody going to be able to sneak that into that mixer and drop it in without being observed. And these are the types of assessments that my experience in food defense and our work at the Global Food Defense Institute, we can help with those. Those again, like I said before, I started the master's program in public health because I had done so many vulnerability assessments and I had written so many food defense plans that I was bored and needed a challenge. So this is something that's very near and dear to my heart. And I also believe in a very pragmatic approach. I mentioned to you on our earlier call that one of my concerns is that companies tend to overregulate themselves. They read the FDA expectations and they then make certain that they're complying by including everything they can possibly stuff into that document. When the final rule for the intentional adulteration takes up 57 pages in the Federal Register. The last 6 or so are really the important ones because that's what contains the statutory language. What we had done previously is we'd gone in and extracted all of the actual expectations, all of the actual requirements that FDA published. And that is what we included in our FDA compliant food defense plans. So it's a very pragmatic approach. It's very simplistic and not overcooked. And I have seen too many food defense plans that have been overcooked. I've seen food defense plans that have been used to justify cameras and other actions that they actually wanted for food safety or for security purposes, but they used food defense as a vehicle to get what they wanted.
There you go. So I remember, and thank you, Rod's here. Awesome. Rod has put in the website for GFDI, which is myfooddefense.com. Thanks, Rod. Also here at the end of the live stream as well, I'm going to put in a link to the actual guidance document I flashed up there. That guide's 159 pages long, so we're obviously not going to go through that here. And I'll also put that in the locals group as well as a reference here too. So sneaky. Yeah. So I remember going back to the original efforts around, biosecurity and these type of things, Clint, was everybody all of a sudden started talking about carver shock. Did that actually provide useful information, or what's the current status of using those type of tools?
I have looked at carver shock in the distant past and decided that it was just too involved. You need too many people. It takes too much effort. And even the FDA has moved away from that into their 3 elements. So the use of carver shock at this point, and again, what I saw years ago was just massive overkill. And again, I believe in a very straightforward approach to solving problems. The problem being, how do I comply with the FDA? So I would not go with carver shock. The original Food Defense Plan Builder 1.0 was an absolute nightmare and accomplished nothing, in my ever so humble opinion. Food Defense Plan Builder 2.0 came very close to getting it right. We actually did a presentation on our simplified methodology versus the Food Defense Plan Builder 2.0. It matched super, super well and was a lot less effort. So you can accomplish the same results while not tying up multiple people for multiple days. So,
Got it.
but again, if you're more comfortable doing the FDA's guidance, and sometimes if you're being audited and they see you use their methodology, suddenly they're not so stringent. If they find out that you have your own science-based probabilistic risk assessment model, you then get to spend a couple pages explaining how it works and why it's valid.
That's a really good point. Whenever you can, always use FDA's own documentation against them, because how are they going to argue against what they wrote?
And that is exactly the way I've phrased it in the past. Use it against them, because words mean things. And if they wrote it, we use it. I don't know how they can complain.
Yep. Megan had a question for you here, Clint. How about USDA guidance that is still outdated when compared to the FDA standards? Do you have any comments relative to that?
I actually have never worked on a USDA facility that I can recall. And I do agree that the guidance is, I want to say, vague as well as outdated. And again, it depends on your goal. If you're a USDA regulated facility and you use the USDA program for your food defense, or their recommendation for your food defense, you should pass. If your concern is your company's viability down the road, then you might want to do a deeper dive and actually be looking at your real risk. So again, it all depends on the goal. If your goal is to comply with USDA, use USDA methods. If your goal is to protect your corporation, do the deeper dive and do a real risk assessment.
Right. Well, and I think it's worth reemphasizing what you just said is, and this is something that I'll say within quality systems is simple is hard, right? It's very easy to write a flowery, complex, here's what we will do, here's what we're going to do in the future type things, right? That you end up hanging yourself, because just because you write it down doesn't mean that people are going to do it. So your system always needs to be ruthlessly efficient. And I think one of the best ways to get to that, and this is, I think, part of the problem as well that we were talking about, is subject matter experts. Are subject matter experts in these particular areas, Clint, are they a valid source of information for helping to set up your program?
I believe that if you have someone that's recognized as an SME, yeah, I believe they're valid. Are they too timid to assert that? That's my concern. You need to be willing to assert your SME status. If FDA is sitting across the table from me and they say, we question your having done this, then I need to be able to explain to them why. My years of experience, my education, the practice I've had with food defense plans and our observations, why those corroborate the approach, why those make it valid. And I have to be able to do it convincingly.
Right.
So again, being willing to assert your SME status is one of the greatest obstacles I've seen.
Who makes a good SME then?
Person that's been in the facility for 20 years, the person that's been at other facilities, the person who has done the deep study of their process and the deep study of the regulatory requirements. So it isn't necessarily time in the saddle related. It's more of a personal characteristic, in my opinion.
Right.
And you also have people who are more than willing to assert their opinions who are horribly incorrect. So you have to be on guard for those as well.
Exactly. So as I'm thinking about a production facility, you're going to have subject matter experts who are kind of dialed into a particular area. So the maintenance group and the engineering team, right? They know the guts of the plant inside and out, where all the pumps go, where all the open areas are, all these type of things. And so they have very specific subject matter expertise in that area. Other people in the plant, human resources and legal, like we talked about before, relative to mitigating the personal risk associated with these type of things. And they have expertise in those areas. Can that expertise in that plant be broken up based upon these particular functions and asserting their expertise in that area? Or does it need to be a kind of an overall package in that person?
You have, hopefully, a qualified individual who is in charge of doing your vulnerability assessment and writing your food defense plan. That individual needs to be able to tap those other resources as necessary. When we're evaluating a process step, I will need to reach out and ask your engineer, can this be opened while the material's present? Can this be, adulterated or contaminated after it's been cleaned and it's sitting to be used again? So there is a lot of information that those individuals will have that I can build into your food defense plan to explain to the FDA why or why it is not an actual process step.
Right.
Also, operating temperatures, pressures, pH, things like that. Anything that's going to remove unwanted components of the raw material as you make your finished product can also be very valuable when it comes to eliminating adulterants that were added intentionally.
Gotcha. So kind of those mitigating factors within your facility. So if let's say that you're in a cheese plant and you're bringing in milk and somebody put a bunch of broken glass in the raw milk, right? Well, you have filters and you have screens that filter that milk coming into the facility. You have other systems in place, homogenizers. The chances of any of that foreign material making it through the finished product, zero, right? But you have to be able to explain that to FDA, right?
Yes, absolutely. And again, oftentimes just defining the process step as operating at high temperatures, high pressure, or the fact that there's filtration prior to it going into the process is usually more than sufficient.
Gotcha. And so, of course, we mentioned, some other tools, right? So experts, SMEs, the documentation, the guidance for industry out there, the Food Safety Plan Builder 2.0. What other type of tools, Clint, could I potentially call upon then to help develop my plan? Because I kind of feel like, so if I'm the poor guy in the plant putting this together, I'm calling on my experts in the facility, I'm reaching out to external sources and things like that. Is there anything else I should be doing as the person who's helping to develop this plan?
It all depends on your level of confidence. If you believe that you can read the regulation and extract what's required, if you believe you can read the guidance document and apply the methods that they've prescribed, I don't know why you would need to reach any further. If you are very timid, if you're concerned, or if you want your plan that you've written reviewed, reaching out to us at the GDFI would be a good plan. Or there are also, other groups. Jason from PepsiCo hosts a food defense consortium call about once a month. And that is a loose organization of food professionals that get to exchange ideas and concerns about food defense issues. So my advice is don't be an island. Yeah. There are conferences, there are webinars, there are places where you can connect with other professionals and you can then bounce your ideas off them to see whether or not they're generally accepted. Some of our stuff used to be pretty unique, but I think we won those conversations eventually.
So it definitely sounds like, again, it's very interesting how this parallels food safety, because one of the things that we say here at the chat is food safety is not a point of competition. This is something that everyone needs to improve their skills in, and it's not going to give your industry a particular advantage. It's the same with food defense, right? It's to all of our benefit to share this information to help all of our plants become more secure.
In the very early stages of ADM's food defense, they determined that there was kind of a moral obligation. If they had a mechanism that would prevent some other company from being attacked via in this manner and harming consumers, and we didn't share it, we would have been at fault morally. So in the first 7 years or so, we used to present a lot at conferences and share with other companies. As time went by, management changed, attitudes changed, and we became a lot less likely to do that. But there's still a very healthy discussion going on.
Good. Well, the other point that I pulled out of what you just said as well is, number one, right, you have to understand what I call the rules of the game. So if you are complying with 21 CFR 117 for your food safety programs, if you're complying with 1.5 for your foreign supplier verification, you have to understand what's required. And then you have to put the systems in place to meet that and prove through records and processes and training and these type of things that you're actually compliant. It's the same with a GFSI certification or something like that. You would never create an SQF program, go out and put all the systems in place and all these type of things, and then not be audited, right? You need those outside eyes to help you see what you probably didn't see. Right? It's the old, you don't know what you don't know. So bringing in an expert to look at those things.
Right. And then again, that's one of the services that we could provide. If you think your food defense plan is too weighty, I'd be more than happy to review it, because we, in our early years when we were running the probabilistic risk assessment model, our food defense plans would run 50 or 60 pages, because we would include charts and graphs explaining how the risks varied from various process step to process step. I was on vacation in the desert one year, and I'm thinking about these 50 or 60 page food defense plans, and I'm like, wait a minute, we can strike this and we can strike that. In the end, we were able to get them down to around 10 pages. It had the same effect.
Nice.
So you can add more information than is necessary.
Yep. Yeah. Don't make your life more difficult than you have to. Jason has a question for you here. Any suggestions or insights for readiness with the FDA's comprehensive food defense inspections beginning at the end of 24?
Very sure of what you've written. That's the first step.
Uh-huh.
I mean, it's just like we were talking about. You've got to review the regulation, that last 6 pages or so in the Federal Register. When they start to question why you did that, be ready to pull up those pages and say, well, it says right here I have to do X. I've done X. Why is that not sufficient? Because if they start reading into what they've written, at that point, we actually years ago took our food defense plan template to legal and asked them to review it to see if they would stand behind us should FDA ever question our approach. The response we got back was very positive. They indicated, yeah, this absolutely complies, and we'll be there for you.
That's a good point.
And I assure you, we did a very streamlined approach to the food defense plan, because we considered compliance to be far less important than actual protection. So all we were doing was stepping over that low bar of compliance and then moving on to actual protection.
Up on that, and then moving from there. So setting your base.
I was going to say, in fact, when it comes to, as insecurities as to whether or not you've done your assessment correctly, whether or not your food defense plan is going to pass muster, we do have training coming up in Orlando on April 24th and 25th. That is going to be the deep dive food defense training. You can check it out on our website. You can get back in touch with me. We can provide additional information on that.
Nice.
So this would be the type of environment where we would be able to have those really deep discussions with clients and about their food defense plans and about how they've gone about that, maybe to give them that extra level of security as to whether or not they're going to pass that inspection.
Nice. Yeah. So part of what I wanted to kind of pull out of what you just said there as well, too, is it's really important, number one, as we just talked about, to understand what the regulations are requiring you to do, what's your compliance standard, how are you meeting those, how do you prove it, but always recognize, and this is key, and so I wanted to reemphasize this, is when that inspector, that investigator, that auditor, whoever is looking at your program steps outside of requirements and then starts essentially going to consulting, right, and saying, well, you really should be doing this. Well, that's not what the reg says. I understand what you're saying. That's an enhancement to your point, Clint, another step up, but that's not what the regulation says. Can you please show me where it says that? Well, it really doesn't say that, but you should, you have to understand the difference between those two categories.
Right. There's also we talked earlier about complying with the third-party audit schemes. In many instances, they want things like visitor logs. They want mail handling protocols. They want all of these things that don't fall under food defense within the FDA's regulation. So the approach that I would recommend on those is make sure they're covered in your facility physical security or some other aspect of your facility's protocols. And then when they ask about that, refer them to that as opposed to taking them to your food defense plan. I've always seen the FDA compliant food defense plans as being very, very targeted to the IA rule, regulation, and requirements, whereas the others are tangential.
Interesting. That's a strong, that's important. And that's a subject there that, it's, so for me, it's kind of a little nebulous, right? It's kind of hard to parse that out as somebody who doesn't deal with this day to day. Interesting.
Well, a facility has certain audit schemes that they know they comply with. So I don't think it would be exceptionally difficult. I mean, if you if you were subject to every audit scheme, it would be a nightmare. But usually you have BRC or SQF or some agency that you deal with. So identifying their quote food defense end quote regulations or requirements will be a little more straightforward. And I think you'll be able to identify where in your other policies and procedures those are actually addressed, as opposed to building a humongous food defense plan.
Yeah, I see. Debbie put a link in here as well. Thank you, Debbie. So let's see. So food defense to advanced. Oh, awesome. Very good. Well, we're getting some amazing resources here today. Thanks, guys. This is really cool. So that's the link to the April class. Oh, gotcha. Perfect. And one of the things that I've always loved, and so my reaction to this, I don't know if this is everybody else's reaction, but when I stumble across a new area of information and knowledge that I don't quite understand, I love it, because that means that's a new area that I can grow and develop in. And I think that's kind of the mindset you need to take on these type of things, is never consider yourself, right, as I know everything, right? I've figured it all out. Once you get to that point, you're hosed, right? We talked on here before about kind of the Dunning-Kruger effect, where you learn a little bit about a subject and now you think you're an expert. And that's a really dangerous place to be, because the experts realize that they kind of go up to that peak and then they start realizing that, oh crap, there's a whole lot here I don't know. And then, you start going back down that curve on that knowledge base, and then you start climbing back up again. For me, one of the things with an expert that, or a SME in a particular area or things like this, is they recognize that, I'm still learning all of this too, right? I know some stuff, but man, there's just a ton there that still needs to be learned. I'll work with you on these type of things, right? It's anytime you hear somebody who says, yep, I know everything and how to do it, and this is exactly the right way to do it, and don't ever deviate because I know, it's probably not a good expert.
An expert with no humility is a dangerous thing.
That is very, very, very true. Oh, another link here from Debbie as well. So link to the FSMA IA, same as April 23rd. Cool. Thank you. Gosh, time. I knew, Clint, that time was going to absolutely fly during this conversation. So let's kind of bring this back up to the 30,000 foot level, because this has been an absolute fire hose of information here today. What would you like to leave with our guests to kind of summarize our conversation today? Where should they start? What type of actions should they do?
I think it's most important that people recognize that this should be a collaborative effort. Mm-hmm. So again, like I said earlier, don't be an island. If you have questions, reach out to us or to your industry peers to make sure that your thinking is sound and will stand scrutiny of the FDA and other agencies. So, and I'm a fairly new addition to the Global Food Defense Institute, but I am serious hardcore food defense, and I live for the opportunity to look at food defense plans, do vulnerability assessments, and write food defense plans. So we want to definitely be considered a solid resource for food defense.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yep. So that is a perfect way to summarize it. And thank you for the comment here, Cortland. Yeah. I see those quote unquote experts every day. They need no help with FDA. Yeah. Good luck with that, right? They're not going to get very far, or they're going to have some major failures that surprise them. So gosh, fantastic. So with that, we're going to bring our chat to a close here today. So as promised, I'm going to put here in the chat a link to the locals group, which again is free. I put information here on recalls and other resources as they come up. So recently we had a conversation with Jose Sabal on the new guidance document for Appendix 1 for not food defense, for food safety. That's in locals now as well. I'm going to be putting in the guidance as well into that here later today. So go to this link and sign up. Happy to help with those. Let me throw directly in here the link to the document that we flashed up on the screen as well. So everybody's got that too. And Rod put in here myfooddefense.com, which is in the comments here as well. So that's Rod's organization that Clint has the good fortune to be a part of now. So definitely reach out to them and have a conversation. Got to start somewhere, right? So with that, guys, we're going to bring our very, very quickly moving chat here to an end today. And we will see you back here next week at Friday at the same time. So 8 a.m. Mountain Time, 10 a.m. Eastern. And again, we live stream on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Twitter. And I know on behalf of Clint, I want to thank everybody. Fantastic engagement. This is why we do this, right? This is just so much fun. This is always a great way to start my day. And Clint, wow, fantastic information here. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And everybody, enjoy your weekend. You did a great job. Sit back, and we'll do it all again next week. So have a great one, and we'll see everybody soon. Have a good one.
Bye-bye.